So welcome. I still see people are joining us, and that's so great to see. For those of you who don't know me and who don't know us, my name is Tessa, and I represent Potato Impact Partners alongside my colleagues Sarah, Bernice, Linda, and Andrews, who are on the call today. If you can all give a wave. We're also super excited to welcome Andrews, who just joined our team last week as an investment associate, and would also like to give a shout out to Hanshi, who is also on the call, our chief spud, whose vision and passion for seaweed drives the work that we do here. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are an impact investor spurring positive contributions to food security, climate action, and the resilience of coastal communities through investments in sustainable seaweed innovation. We started back in 2022, and we have a portfolio now of four companies and four funds. And PIP, as we call ourselves, we're the US-based subsidiary of Potato Productions, a group of social technology ventures in Singapore spanning many industries such as design, media, publishing, education, and healthcare. This is our fourth Seaweed Squad call, and we started this initiative to contribute to knowledge sharing, promoting community, network, collaboration, and co-investments across different regions. So thank you all so much for being here today, being a part of the conversation, and making the space what it is. Just a quick note on how today will run. We'll have a fireside chat with John and Caitriona, so we're so excited to have them, and I'll let them introduce themselves very shortly. We'll have about 30 minutes there, and then we'll do a quick transition to breakout rooms just so you can meet some more folks from the ecosystem and community. And then we'll end again in a big group, sort of plenary discussions where you can ask any remaining questions you have for our speakers and just share any thoughts you have from today. So, with that, I'd like to invite John and Caitriona to introduce themselves, their organizations, their work with seaweed. If you could keep introductions to 1 to 2 minutes, that would be great. So, John, over to you.
All right, rapid fire. My name is John Soukas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Norfolk Green Ventures. We are solely focused on seaweed. Um, I started Norfolk about a little over 3.5 years ago with my partner, Jason Mitchell. I've been in the investment industry for over 30 years, the last 20 of which were at the Wellington Management Company here in Boston, a large asset manager. Um, my interest started to drift, and I started a private company focused on marine real estate, marinas servicing of both commercial and leisure craft. And one day I was looking at these water sheets in the winter, the boats were gone. And I'm like, what could we do with these things? And I went down the rabbit hole and discovered something called seaweed and convinced myself in pretty short order that was a unicorn and had the potential to be the most transformative crop of our lifetime, which inspired me to start Norfolk Green Ventures. Here we are.
Thank you so much, John. And over to you, Caitriona.
Hi everyone, I'm Caitriona Kelleher from Hatch Blue. I'm MD of Early Stage Investments at Hatch Blue. Hatch is an interesting organization because we position ourselves as an aquaculture knowledge company. We have three distinct kind of revenue generating areas, investments where I sit, but we also have a consultancy and a programs unit, and ultimately all units are working in the aquaculture space, and we believe that that provides a very synergistic approach in terms of knowledge gathering that leads to insights, and from my point of view, insights in particular. Hatch Blue investing is split between early stage and growth stage. I manage the early stage. The distinction is that every company within the early stage portfolio has received investment through our accelerator-led funds. That means all the companies joined us on a global journey to explore the aquaculture hubs of the world in order to broaden their exposure and their access to network capital and connections. So the portfolio I manage is, I think, 63 active companies at the moment, and 9 of which are directly related to seaweed. And I'm based here in Cork, Ireland, so in between the US and Southeast Asia. So nice to see you all.
Thank you both so much for the rapid fire introductions. Caitriona, I'm gonna start with you and maybe, pull back and set the scene and get some context before we dive into seaweed. But so before we dive deeper into seaweed, pulling back to look at the larger picture, we know the ocean economy is massive, but as a report by Builders Vision and Catapult highlighted, less than 1% of capital, and that includes philanthropic, development assistance, impact investing. Less than 1% is directed towards regenerative ocean-related projects. So, from your perspective at Hatch, why do you think this is the case, and what role can investors and organizations like Hatch play in closing that funding gap?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? I think ultimately, as a segment, seaweed, I believe, is behind the curve in terms of having a central, strong advocate voice. Meaning that often the messaging is very uncoordinated in the space, and it leads to a lack of true understanding of the opportunity. The opportunity then is kind of not fully realized because of the lack of coordination, amplified by the lack of ground truth information and case studies, showing proof of success. And we really need more of that to act as a lightning rod, so that the champions that are already in the space can really work in a more coordinated fashion, to advocate for the sector at large. I think we ultimately run the risk of having kind of a reputation as evangelists rather than commercial pioneers. Again, kind of running the risk of the perception being that the sector needs soft capital rather than soft capital needs the sector. Um, I think in terms of Hatch, look, we have been investing in seaweed since our beginning. So back in 2019, we've continued to invest, and I think investors like ourselves and Norfolk Green can really be the pioneers in the space. But the space doesn't just need capital, and I suppose outside of direct investment, Hatch has been very kind of active. We have spun up Seaweed Insights, which is an initiative coming from our consultancy unit, and it basically aims to systematically kind of document the reality of seaweed farming globally, identifying the technology gaps, validating innovation needs across the sector. And it's an open platform, so it can be used by entrepreneurs themselves, but researchers and investors and those managing soft capital, let's say. I mean, in 22, we started the initiative with 100 farm visits, in the East and Southeast Asian region. And we covered five of the many commercial seaweed species. We've expanded in 2024 to Alaska. This year, we're looking at Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have plans to cover Africa in 2026. So I really think, initiatives like this can provide this ground truth and again support the champions that we already have in the sector.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I think you sort of dug, or you're starting to dig into the next question already, but can you share more about how you see seaweed as an industry compared to the wider aquaculture industry? And I know Hatch has a number of seaweed companies as part of your portfolio. So for you, what is compelling about the seaweed industry, and maybe what are challenges that are unique to this industry?
I swear my building isn't on fire. That's just the fire alarm. Sorry. It'll go out temporarily, I promise.
We actually can't hear it, or I can't
Oh,
hear it.
great. Okay.
Oh, we can't we
Sorry.
can't hear a thing.
So, ultimately, for us, we're super excited about seaweed as a segment because it is broader than just food. Like typically the rest of our aquaculture interests are super focused on just food. And yet seaweed can be a feedstock for anything. Ultimately, on the last count that we did ourselves, there's 200 plus applications. And so the market is amazing. It can de-risk us because it's so diversified. And there's so much potential outside of food, right? Like the food for seaweed is tapped to a level, whereas all these additional markets are really untapped for now. Um, I think in the same way, this provides a unique challenge to the seaweed space because ultimately we have a whole load of um, like species and varieties, same way aquaculture does. But in aquaculture, we're used to talking about salmon or shrimp or mussels or, these subsectors. But yet we kind of talk about seaweed as a collective. And I think that's very hard then for the industry to kind of tap into, okay, where are the exact opportunities and why is this an opportunity in this species versus not an opportunity in another species? So it's super technical on a level, and in ways we haven't actually tried to, um, or there isn't enough being work done to date to kind of actually segment it out properly so people understand, okay, for this varietal, there isn't a high value product, but for this varietal, there is. And this varietal that grows in North America has a totally different value proposition to a different species or even the same species grown in different waters. So for me, that's the biggest significant challenge versus the aquaculture space. I mean, it's all farming, right? There's like biological risks that are common to everyone. There's operational risks. But I truly think in terms of the diversification of the species and the unique applications of the species, that's pretty much not well understood and where we can improve.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm hearing, biological risk, operational risk is the same as other industries in aquaculture, but with seaweed, we have a diversification of species and all these unique applications that we still need to understand further.
And
Um,
communicate better on ultimately, because, again, people just talk in terms of seaweed as a kind of a universal word, whereas aquaculture is the universal word, but we have the broken down elements that are clearer understood, I think, across the market.
Thank you. John, next question is for you, and I'm excited to ask you this question because as the two sole investors focused on seaweed, we've talked about this a lot.
Yep.
The question that comes up is that if seaweed is so promising, why isn't it booming already? So I know Caitriona touched on some challenges, but from your perspective, what are the primary barriers to rapid scale, particularly regarding capital markets and investor focus?
A great question, and I get this every time I walk through the story and talk about the merits of seaweed, and they look at me, completely dazed and confused. It just doesn't seem possible. I think one of the first things is, and Catherine touched on a little bit, is awareness. I have spoken to many sophisticated investors, leaders of major financial corporations that are extremely well informed and smart. And when I walk through this story, they've never heard it before, which shocks me. So I think awareness is super important. And I watched a video by Andreessen recently, and he talked about, breakthrough products, et cetera. And one of the things he talked about was initially when things are first evolving, they seem weird and strange. And when I talk about seaweed, people look at me and think it's weird and strange, until it's not. And I think soybeans are a great example of this. Initially, it was considered a strange Asian bean. It was odd. Weird people did that stuff. And it's gone over the past 50 years from a $12 million crop to an $80 billion crop. So I think awareness is important, and we've worked very hard to do that. In fact, we launched a gin, a seaweed or kelp infused gin recently, to largely create awareness. I don't think we're going to make a ton on it. You never know. It's actually really good, but the focus is trying to communicate and create awareness about the capabilities of seaweed. That would be number one. Number two, again, at a very high level, especially in the US, less so in the rest of the world, ESG, sustainability, green have become bad words. And because of that, it's hard to attract funding. And 4 years ago, it was a cool thing to do. ESG was cool, interesting, and industry did attract a lot more funding at the time. But until that changes, that's going to be a major headwind. And I had a recent conversation with somebody in the current administration, and they're like, can you just kind of change the narrative a bit and make it more about um, national security, energy independence, et cetera, because that's way more palatable for um, policymakers in the US at this time. And in some ways, you can make the energy security argument. So, but the world has changed a little bit with respect to sustainability and green. I would say the third thing that really jumps out is just the cost of capital has gone up a lot. Um, from the post-COVID lows, depending on where you were funding at, interest rates and capital costs have gone up 3 to 6 times. And when the cost of capital goes up, um, other opportunities look more interesting. And I think that's been a major impediment to the industry, especially because it's capital intensive. This is an old school industry. We're talking farms, plant, equipment, refiner. It's an old school industry that requires capital. And when the cost of capital goes up that much, it makes it pretty challenging. And I think one of the things that Catherine alluded to earlier is that, we've kind of referred to it as when the cost of capital is low and people are really excited about it, you get a lot of tourists involved, and tourists tend to get ripped off. And I think that the industry has changed a lot. It's more about professional investing now. Sustainability is important, but for profit is important. If it's not sustainable unless it's profitable over time. And so I think that's been, kind of the third factor that's made things challenging. And when you layer on top of that, the VC industry is very focused on capital light, makes it even tougher to find sources of capital. So those would be the three things that jump out to us as some of the impediments that have made the industry not grow as quickly as as you would think.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really like the example of the soy industry because it really shows you that it has been done before and there is potential for seaweed.
And as Catherine mentioned as well, it's a much the crop itself has much broader applications. And then layer on top of that, you don't need land, water, fertilizer. I mean, we wouldn't be involved if we didn't think so, but it's a no-brainer. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for my next question, I'd like to pick up on something Caitriona shared, which was that seaweed goes beyond food. And I think you've also remarked that many investors primarily think of seaweed only as food. So can you say a little bit more about the breadth of the market opportunity beyond food and what are areas or applications that really resonate with your thesis at Norfolk and that excite you?
Well, I think in order for this to really reach its full potential, we have to attack those industries that have massive scale potential. And I think the polymer industry, the plastics industry, things using fossil fuels are huge opportunities. I think we've done some work, and the market size of polymers is like $1 trillion. So we're focused on those types of products. And I think that this is where you can create real demand. Um, and once you create demand, I think if you build it, they will come. So three things jump out at us. One of them, ink, I think has a more near-term opportunity to gain some traction. A company that we invested in called Living Inc. Pretty cool company. Their material made from seaweed, and you can make it from other biomasses as well, fits directly into the existing supply chain. It's 100% biodegradable. It doesn't use nearly as much water. Carbon footprint significantly smaller, and like I said, I think that products like that, where there is actually margin, present an interesting opportunity. So I think ink is one, textiles another. Um, Seaweed-based textiles uh, are naturally non-flammable, which presents again another interesting opportunity to sell a product at a high margin. And unlike some of the other non-flammable materials, they're not toxic. Um, so I think there's a lot of potential with textiles, and the cotton industry is huge. It uses a lot of water, fertilizer, etc. Um, and I think that alternative textiles made from alginate represent a pretty big opportunity, both woven and non-woven materials. So that's an area that we're also focused on, and I think could be the catalyst to help seaweed become a globally traded commodity, which for any industry where you have a commodity at its base, you need that market infrastructure to help make it grow and flourish. Um, and then just plastics. As I mentioned to you earlier before we started the call, microplastics are killing us. We need to find an alternative. And I think that it's a huge market with lots of upside, and seaweed could be the biomass that helps us deliver those types of products to the consumer.
Thank you for that. It really sounds like we got to go after industries that have this huge scale potential to get it to a place where it's it's fundable and also can make profit because at the end of the day, like you said, it needs to make financial sense. Um,
We're sustainability, like I said, super important. Obviously, this is why I think seaweed is unique. It presents this opportunity to do good for the planet, but also do well.
yeah,
And as investors, and that's this intersection, I think, will ultimately, be a key driver of attracting capital.
yeah, great. Caitriona, back to you, sort of with your role at Hatch and having such a wide breadth of experience with other parts of the aquaculture industry, are there any lessons or best practices that you think the seaweed sector could learn from other parts of aquaculture, particularly when it comes to scaling production or attracting capital?
Yeah, I think I'm on a theme today. So one of the ones that popped out at me straight away is what they've done in terms of advocacy. And like John mentioned, soya there, right? I mean, the Soya Council, right? USEC is a massive organization that really works to promote the sales of soya external to the US, right? I think programs like that can really help a sector. Within aquaculture, we've seen that through the Sustainable Shrimp Partnership. This is a global initiative, ultimately a collaboration between companies, NGOs, stakeholders to really elevate the industry and promote the industry as very, the sustainable practices of the industry that make it a super protein ultimately. Similarly, let's say if you think back to, and you're probably all too young for this, but Project Japan. This was like a Norwegian initiative to get Norwegian salmon into sushi. And it basically was a government funded campaign. To John's point, everyone thought they were mad, right? Salmon wasn't seen as that high grade, sushi appropriate fish. And yet they ran this campaign through tastings, through advocacy, through basically discounts and funding, whereby the product was well positioned into a brand new market, supported there. And, within the space of 10 years, it became synonymous with sushi, and so much so that the younger generation won't ever realize that that wasn't its primary purpose day one. And again, look, seaweed, even as a name, is pretty poor branding, right? Where it's
Yeah.
almost like where it's like, oh, it's a weed, comes from the sea. Okay, great. How do we go from here? So I think there's a huge amount that the segment can do in terms of promoting itself. And again, getting a kind of a lightning rod or a talisman that people can group around and work from, so that all the energy and appetite that's in the space is not wasted. Just that whole consolidated of energies. But I suppose more to your specific question in terms of the scaling piece. Um, from a very practical level, I would think that again they can learn about working with governments, let's say marine spatial planning. This is long-term planning that local governments will do. If you miss the boat, pardon the pun, you could be 10 years waiting to get your license in a certain space, and getting people really thinking in terms of, okay, this is something I need to know what my government's appetite is. I need to get in front of my government. I need to understand what the time frame is and work within that time frame, because otherwise, there's a potential huge missed opportunity there. And lastly, I would say just in terms of the pure scaling, um, again, John touched on this, right? We do very unsustainable things at the early stage because you're proving it out. And I think we're seeing that a lot in the seaweed space at the moment, where we have fully integrated solutions. There's very few fully integrated solutions in aquaculture now, it as a mature industry, let's say. No one, not everyone is trying to build the space rocket, not everyone is trying to build the full fish farm. We need people to diversify into the picks and shovels, whether that's within the farming piece, whether it's downstream. But we are forcing the market to be fully integrated at the moment, and that's extremely capital intensive. To John's point about being capital light is what your professional investor wants. And I think we need to support the industry to try and think in terms of um, bits rather than whole. But while that transition happens, we still need to support the market.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate the example of the Norwegian initiative to get salmon into
It's a
sushi.
great
I'd never
example.
heard of that. That's such a good example.
A
And
great
with
example.
yeah, with John's soy example as well, it really shows that perspectives can change through advocacy and if we just get around it. So John, really rooting for the seaweed gin that you're working on.
It's called Nantucket Salty Gin. Um, it's a JV with Cisco Brewers slash AAA Distillers, or a Nantucket-based distillery and brewery with a quasi-cult following. So we're pretty excited about it. It tastes great. And hopefully, it creates some awareness about seaweed.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe last question for you, John, before we transition into the next portion of today. But from your experience, with all the seaweed companies who haven't made it, we hear in the news like, another seaweed company has not made it. What could all of these companies have done differently?
Ooh, um, there's that's a good question. I mean, you know, um, it's tough, but I would say that a few things jump out. First of all, although the barriers to entry are low, B2C and especially food-related products are tough. People aren't rational. Um, we drink wine and whiskey and eat red meat, and we probably shouldn't, but we do. And I think convincing people that something called seaweed in North America is something that you should eat. It's a tough sell. Um, the B2C thing, like I said, food in particular, we've seen a number of companies struggle in that space. The second thing I think and we see this a lot, and we really try to push this, is financials, financial modeling of your business, understanding your business from a financial perspective. Um, the products are cool and there's always great stories, but when it comes down to it, you really need to understand the details on this stuff. And at the early stage of a company, we know it's more art than science. We know that. But from an investor's perspective, it gives us a sense of the rigor around how the founders are thinking about their business. And also understanding, what assumptions they're making, how all these pieces fit together. And there's only been a handful of companies that have done that really, really well. And it's important for us to see that. And, ultimately, it will help these founders run their businesses more effectively. And I would say the third thing related to that, and there's a lot of things in each case. I'm trying to think of what things overlap and are more useful at a broader level. I would say that funding agreements, like leases for real estate, leases for equipment. Um, at the time, something may seem really appealing and absolutely essential for your business, but unless those agreements are well thought out, they could become single points of failure, because if you have a contract, you can't just decide to break it because it doesn't work anymore. And we have seen on a number of occasions that these types of contracts, they're not well negotiated, really bite people in the wrong places um, when things get a little tight. And this is, again, basic finance. One company we had looked at, they're, they presented this lease to us and they're like, wow, it's a pretty good rate. It's like 1% a month. But they didn't fully appreciate how leases worked and equipment buybacks, et cetera. The implied interest rate was 36%. So that financial rigor, I think, is important, and it doesn't require you to be a lot smarter, just to be diligent and rigorous. And we've seen that really hurt a number of companies. So um, I know Caitriona might be able to jump in here and add a few other points, but those are the things that have stood out to us over the past three or so years, um, and the 250 companies that we've looked at.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just one that I would say, um, listening to you there, John, is ambition, tempering that with just practicality, and it's good to have a vision and sell a vision. That's what brings a lot of investors to the table, but it won't it won't carry the company. So again, being able to do that bite-sized, okay, these are the steps to bring the vision to reality, and having kind of rigor around those steps, because what happens is I think visionaries try and do too much too quickly. And again, rush into leases, or, overextend themselves because it's just that
Yeah,
next bit. It's only 2 minutes away, or another
yeah,
2 days, or whatever. But it like seaweed is a super exciting sector, especially for the youth of today that can appreciate the opportunity within that biomass. But sometimes they're not the commercially minded people,
yeah.
and they need to find a few friends to balance them out, or co-founders.
If I can add one more point to that, I think the one thing that we see a lot early on is focus. Um, Seaweed is this interesting, organism that you can do a lot of stuff with it. And we've spoken to a number of companies, and their plan is we're going to do these three or four things. And three or four things means you're spreading resources thin across a number of opportunities. And we are big believers in the one thing. Focus on the one thing that you think your business or your team will ultimately be the best in the world at. And if you can do that, you're going to have a much clearer vision, you're going to have a much cleaner plan, and you're not going to waste resources. And One of the companies that we really like, and the folks at Pitt know it really well, Cascadia. When we first met them, they had a lot going on, food, biostimulants, farming, a lot going on. But it's an experienced team. They figured it out pretty quickly and said, we're going to zone in on this biostimulant thing. We're going to shed everything else. And I think that was an important transition for them. And they did it early, which I think has put them in a stronger position than they would have been otherwise. And it's something that we see a lot of companies do because something comes up, it's interesting, they maybe get some funding for it, and they want to pivot or change. And that distraction makes it very, very hard, I think, to execute on a plan. So, one thing.
I think Cascadia is a great example. They started, they had a CPG portion and then
Exactly.
pivoted away from it. So, yeah, this is so great. I'm hearing, focus, temper, ambition with practicality, financial modeling, making sure your funding agreements, your leases, that you're being a bit more diligent, rigorous with it. This is also great. Um, and we'll definitely have more time when we come back after the breakout room. So for the audience, if you have any questions, hold on to them. We'll have time for them after the breakout rooms. But right now, we're going to transition into breakout rooms for about 12 minutes. This is an opportunity for you to meet some others in the ecosystem. It's not a lot of time, we realize, so it's meant to be just a start of a conversation. We have some prompts for you that we will paste into the chat. So feel free to introduce yourself to each other if you don't already know each other. Share a challenge that you've encountered in investing in seaweed, or if you haven't invested in seaweed yet, perhaps why are you interested in investing in seaweed?